governance structure and or replacing personnel is not going to fix what fundamentally ails the city. Technical changes to the budgeting process, such as zero-based budgeting, will not magically generate the many millions of dollars needed to defray the substantial backlog of capital expenditures that have accrued over multiple years and in some cases, decades. And there are two ways off the path to insolvency the city is currently on: service expenditure reductions and new revenue. I anticipate that after seeing the exhibits to follow, my colleagues will likely agree a combination of both is warranted. And so we have Exhibit 1 on the screen. Before we can talk about needed revenue, I think it's beneficial to establish some form of a baseline, because some cities are obviously larger than others. Comparing raw revenue figures tells us very little. Exhibit 1 seeks to aid comparability between communities of various sizes by showing their relative rank by tax revenue per square mile. Because some cities have implemented property tax levies for roads and other capital maintenance, this chart shows both income and property tax revenue per mile. The cities are sorted from greatest to least, and as can be seen, Gahanna comes in second from last at $1.6 million per mile, per square mile, less than half the average for the cohort of $3.9 million per square mile. Craig, you want to move to Exhibit 2, please? This next exhibit is showing the same revenue figures in the numerator and Census Bureau population in the denominator. Coincidentally, similar to the per square mile example, at $585 per capita, Gahanna is second from last when viewed in this manner as well, ahead of only Reynoldsburg. It is worth noting in November of 2006, Reynoldsburg voters approved a change to that city's income tax rate from 1.5% to 2.5% with a 100% credit, quite similar to what was in front of Gahanna voters this past November. Reynoldsburg began collecting on that in July of 2017, so what is shown in this chart reflects only a half year of collections at the new rate. It is expected once 2018 audits are completed, Gahanna will hold the dubious distinction of being dead last in tax revenue per capita. Greg, would you mind moving on to Exhibit 3, please? So how did the city of Gahanna stature find itself as an outlier facing significant budget strain? Well, a lot of that stems from an inability to adapt to the dual challenges of leveling growth coupled with the disastrous effects of the 2008 and 2009 recession. The chart in Exhibit 3 shows total general fund revenue in the blue line overlaid to the city's general fund balance. It is important to note that the fund balance figure shown here is inclusive of all accounting classifications, meaning that the entire figure may not be available to be spent down in the case of an emergency. For the purposes of this conversation, it is illustrative because what we can see is following the recession, with revenues plummeting from a pre-crisis high of over $29 million to as low as $22.8 million following the enactment of state aid cuts a few years later, management drew down fund balance to avoid the immediate impact of service cuts. As economic growth has rebounded, revenues have recovered somewhat, although as of year-end 2017, total general fund revenue was still more than 11% below pre-recession levels. On a cumulative basis, if you were to hold 2007 revenue flat, compare it to actual revenue realized in the 10 years that followed, that total gap would be equal to over $46 million in foregone revenue. How has the city coped with this large-scale loss of revenue? Partly by spending down reserves, as represented by the declining gray bars and the chart showing a drop in fund balance. The other piece to this equation is by deferring capital maintenance, which we'll see shortly. Craig, if you would move to Exhibit 4, please. Before discussing how Gahanna has dealt with the gap, it might be helpful to consider how other peer communities have dealt with the fiscal challenges. Exhibit 4 shows the tax rate for 15 cities in Franklin County by year for the period 2002 through 2018. Starting in the early 2000s, a handful of cities saw the need for additional revenue and asked voters to approve an adjustment to their rate. New Albany, Worthington, and Grandview all raised their income tax rates prior to the recession. After the recession, however, we can see an uptick in the growing trend of cities changing their tax rates, with Grandview voters reauthorizing 2.5% following a sunset of a temporary rate. Also, Columbus and Westerville voters elected to raise their tax rates, followed by Worthington again, as well as Whitehall, Bexley, Upper Arlington, and the last holdout at 1.5%, Reynoldsburg, finally made the necessary adjustment to 2.5% 2 years ago, leaving Gahanna again last as the only city remaining in the county with a sub 2% tax rate.